Welcome to 3 Point Cyber, a podcast about cybersecurity topics and events for the layperson. The ideas, opinions, and discussions of this podcast are those of the host, co-host, and guest, and do not necessarily represent the views of their respective employers or affiliates. Recording and propagation of this podcast is highly encouraged as long as an acknowledgement is given to the ownership. Music and graphics used in the podcast and promotional materials cannot be used in other events not tied to the podcast without the express written consent from Alpha Omega Advisors. We are now at episode 6, and I have with me my co-host, Andrew Risch. Sure appreciate him again being here late at night. I'm not feeling as bad about these late nights with him now because he just told me he's only 5 hours ahead of me instead of 6 hours.
Thank goodness for daylight savings time, although this will only be for the next week here, and then we'll go back to the normal 6 hours. But I do keep up with the news while I'm over here in Poland, and some of the articles I've been reading have been about daylight savings time, and apparently Congress, and I guess it's passed the Senate, to change and make daylight savings time permanent.
They did.
And what's funny to me about that is the passion that seems to be behind some of these articles, as if this was a major thing for a lot of people, and it's been really bothering a lot of people for many years. So,
well, you know, they say psychologically it's not a good thing. These time changes are not good things for people. So
is that what's been going on with the world?
Maybe, I guess it is. I mean, here we're in a time warp right now. You're 5 hours ahead of me right now, and another week you're going to be 6. So, you know, none of it just makes sense. Personally, I think the whole world should just go on 24-hour clock time, and everybody.
There you go.
So, really, what's the difference between it being 1800 and 0900?
Well, yeah, and what are we going to do when we get to Mars? I mean, then we got a whole new thing to figure out, right?
Well, then I guess that would be, how many years ahead of me in time would you be?
There you go.
That would make a podcast very difficult.
It would.
You know, I'm really curious to know what the delay time is on a voice signal from Mars back to Earth.
I bet we could easily Google that, but yeah.
Probably could. You know, that might be good in editing because I could really have plenty of time to bleep someone out really quick. Or actually not so quick, I guess, you know.
Yeah, you could have a completely different interview.
What I can't understand of someone that may be wanting to take one of those trips knowing that would be the last trip they'd ever take.
Yeah, that's a little, wow, I don't even know what to say. That's very deep.
So I'm told that it's 5 to 20 minutes delay time.
5 to 20?
That's what I'm told, depending on the planetary locations.
Okay.
That's an interesting one. So if I'm sitting here asking you a question, I could be waiting 5 to 20 minutes before I heard an answer back from you.
Yeah, that would be a very long time and that would be a lot of editing. I mean, you'd.
Well, I think I think it's safe to say I'm not going to be doing any podcasts with any Martians.
There we go.
I'm just not going to have anybody on here from Mars. not that it matters. You know,
not that there's anything wrong with being a Martian.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. So today's episode, I'm really looking forward to having this discussion. I have asked Mr. Colin O'Conner, Chief Operating Officer from ReliaQuest, on. I've known Colin for a while. In full transparency, he's the Chief Operating Officer for ReliaQuest, as I mentioned. ReliaQuest was a company that I brought in at my last organization to help us with our security operations. When I was there, they were a fantastic partner. Do not regret that decision at all. I would make that decision again. As the CISO, Colin can probably attest that I was probably hard on them in several times. But, you know, as a CISO, that's what I'm supposed to be doing because I'm watching out for my organization, right? So a little bit about ReliaQuest first, just real quick, and we're going to get into this discussion anyway, but they are a leading provider of XDR as a service, which XDR stands for Extended Detection and Response. So they are basically a cyber company that handles cyber services for other companies. ReliaQuest was started in 2006. 2007. They are rapidly grown. They've grown really big since I've known them and since I've known Colin. I've known Colin, by the way, since he was basically in sales at ReliaQuest, and he's moved his way up and has done an excellent job at help leading that company. ReliaQuest has rapidly grown into one of the leading providers of IT security for some of the most recognizable corporations in the world, and they have locations all over the world. I'm sure Colin will be happy to share that information in a few minutes. So right after this, I'm going to bring Colin on. And we're back. So let's welcome Colin now. Colin, thanks for joining us and taking the time out to do this podcast with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
If you would, just to kind of give us a brief overview of ReliaQuest again and what you guys are doing and where you may be heading here in the short future.
Sure. ReliaQuest is an organization that was founded in Tampa, Florida in 2007. Our founder and actually currently our CEO as well, Brian Murphy. ReliaQuest has grown rapidly, mainly since about 2014 when we kind of found our niche working with enterprise organizations to improve security operations. And what that means to the general person is ReliaQuest works with large enterprise companies, some of the most well-known name brands that you use and interface with every day, to help them to see more, detect bad things, and respond to those things. And we do that through our security operations platform, which is powered by an open XDR architecture. And I hope we get to talk about what XDR is because everybody uses it in a different manner. And I've had the opportunity to work with ReliaQuest since an intern. I met Dave, as he mentioned, when I was in sales back in 12 or 13. Since then, I pivoted to the more technical side. And as COO, I ran ReliaQuest security operations, their product development teams, analytics, customer success, and had the opportunity to work with hundreds of CISOs across the country and across the world as they look to build out a resilient security operations function to defend their companies.
Thanks, Colin. So let's kind of get right into this whole discussion. And you mentioned you would like to talk about XDR. So there's an excellent starting point. So why don't you just briefly talk to me about what XDR is and what ReliaQuest is doing with it?
First, I think we got to just frame up for the group what is going on in the world of security operations. I think everybody who turns on the TV hears about cyber threats and their ever-growing presence and disruption to business, the financial impacts that they've caused from everybody from healthcare providers to retailers to financial services companies. Probably all of us have lost personal data. Happens like every 6 months, something happens where LifeLock notifies me. And so what's ended up happening is companies have had to evolve their ability to detect and respond to threats. And they've sought a number of different ways to do so. One is they buy technologies. The average the average company today owns over 40 security technologies that work in all of these different silos. Everything from trying to protect someone's laptop, somebody like Andrew from going and clicking on a link might download malware and cause an infection, all the way to buying next generation cloud security platforms or next generation firewalls. I mean, you name it. There are tons of different technologies. And what ends up happening for most of these companies, we buy all these technologies and then you are expected to operate them and to take in all of the things that they're telling you and be able to make decisions based on that data. And what ends up happening is it's like a fire hose. It's actually like 40 fire hoses. And so what ReliaQuest built is a security operations platform we call Gray Matter that sits and takes in feeds from all of the different technologies and it uses intelligence and machine learning. I won't go as far as AI, but statistical analysis, things like that to help chew through a lot of that noise. And then ReliaQuest teams all around the globe help to work with our customers to really make sense of that noise and then take action where important. And what XDR is, extended detection and response. Unfortunately, our industry is booming and people have defined that in many different ways. The way that we view it is XDR is the ability to interact with those 40 different technologies within an organization and help a small, mostly understaffed security team, which I've never met even a Fortune 100 company say they have enough security professionals, a small understaffed security team be able to be more, right? And we call it Gray Matter as a force multiplier. We believe that a good XDR platform is a force multiplier for security operations teams. And that's what we aim to deliver for our customers.
So do you think it's fair for me to kind of categorize ReliaQuest as they're not really a security operations center company like they used to be anymore, but they've really matured into more proactiveness in helping companies take it a step further? Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think it would. I think, just like everybody in this industry, we've realized that people are not enough. And we've invested what we've learned from working with, at this point, 400 plus enterprise security operations centers, and we've codified it into technology. We still have, 450 plus security professionals around the globe that help our customers every day. But we believe that a technology-led process is the future. And that's what we've built.
Yeah. So I think one of the defining differences I believe that you have is actually the idea that you have a product of your own that takes what you mentioned earlier, that takes all of that information, which it can be very overwhelming to any security team, and try to make sense at what they're seeing. Because that's one of the things that my team always struggled with. Was I building security teams and putting in security operations centers, the thing that we always had was so much data, we didn't know really what to even make of some of it. So you were mentioning it, you guys have the product called Gray Matter, which was being built to incorporate all of your different types of feeds from different systems, make some sense out of it, which is a big game changer. And I think that's one of the things that has to be done today. We're going to get into a topic here that has come up on at least three of our episodes, and that's called offensive security. It's one of Andrew's favorite because he likes to jump in there and talk about what offensive security really is. Being an Army guy, he wants to jump in there and start beating everybody's heads right away. But that's not what offensive security is, and we always have that discussion so far on our episodes. Colin, I think one of the things that as I was building teams and building operations, it didn't take me long to realize that simply setting in a room with your analyst and your engineers and watching all of this data was good enough for an organization to stay protected. We had to get a lot more proactive, even to a point where you were going on the offense in your own network. And that's what my definition of offensive security is actually going into your own network and start to perform threat hunting. And that means looking for things that can cause threats to your own organizations, whether they're already existing in your network via misconfigurations or just even down to the users using assets incorrectly, or even finding threat actors that may be on the network already or have placed something on the network that could be used in the future. And that to me is what offensive security really is in our field. Talk to me what you've seen over the last few years change in that aspect.
Yeah, I think I think offensive security, proactive security is so essential when it comes down to the success of a security organization. And I almost liken it to, if you're a soccer fan, if you watch a team constantly play defense, they're mostly going to lose the game. You got to balance out what you're doing. And when I go and I talk to a customer or a potential customer and I'm listening to what they're saying, when a team is drowning or they're just constantly on defense, just constantly taking a barrage of data and alerts, and we are dealing with fires all the time, it's almost impossible for them to actually secure the business. It's because all they're doing is running from one thing to the next. And I think what's so important is using technology to try and remove noise and trying to focus on, what's important. And there's always going to be things that happen to you, things reported by a user, things that are detected by the sensors and everything else. But using technology and using automation to try and handle as many of those, what now I would consider business as usual. 2 years ago, if a customer saw ransomware in their environment, they'd be freaking out. Today, the amount of strains that are out there that are detected and mitigated in near real time, that's become very normal. And the companies that are handling it the best have used technology to instrument those types of reactions. Because to your point, most companies, especially in the enterprise, they're adding new SaaS applications, they're moving into the cloud, they're adding new technology stacks to enable their business, which is increasing their threat landscape. And those security teams have to get out into the business and start looking for anomalies, start looking for threat actors. And if there aren't any threat actors, they need to be looking at the things that would enable a threat actor to take advantage of a misconfigured system, a system that maybe has broad privileges, or things that would put the company in a potentially bad situation. And the best companies that I see they're dedicating more and more of their time to going and working with the business, trying to get ahead of some of those IT changes versus just constantly dealing with the fire hose of issues that historically actually is what a SOC did. I mean, historically, a security operations center just took thing after thing after thing, and they were almost like rewarded for just putting out fires all the time. And today it's just not good enough.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I like your analogy of soccer. I've never really thought about that one before, but yeah, if you have a soccer team out there playing defense and they're never trying to score, they're not going to win the game. They're just not going to get beat as bad. That's pretty much the way it is. I've never thought about that one, but I like that analogy a lot. So I'm probably going to steal it from you, Colin, and use it on another one.
That's fine. Royalties can come later.
Okay, good.
what you do, would you say, do you replace the security architecture or a company's security operations center, or do you more supplement or do both? And if you do a little of both, is there one that you consider better than the other?
So I think historically, and by historically in cyber terms is like 2019, 2020. But, I think historically people have had this idea that you're either going to insource security and you're going to buy all the tools and hire all the people, or you're going to outsource security to a managed service provider or a managed security service provider, an MDR provider or MXDR provider, or whatever they're calling themselves today. And I think what we've found and what I've seen is that you can't do one or the other. You need to find a partner that is going to be a force multiplier for your team. It's impossible to outsource cybersecurity. I don't know if Dave, you'd agree with me on this, but I've never seen it work. And the reason it doesn't work is because no one understands your business like your employees.
Yeah, completely.
Now, there's a ton in security operations that you can take and you can apply across multiple businesses, right? I mean, it's what we do. We call it our network effect, right? If I see a type of threat over here, I can identify that threat over here based on indicators of compromise, like, hey, they're using the same system or the same technique. But when it comes to like analyzing what's normal within a business or what's acceptable within a business, you have to be in the business. You got to be sitting or virtually sitting in the same company as them. And so, when we look at it, probably about 50% of the time, we are displacing managed security service providers because they don't deliver the results that you'd want. And at the same time, our best customers are investing in people, they're investing in their technologies, they're building a capability to start working offensively within those companies. And they're using somebody like ReliaQuest to try and take all of the feeds and all the noise and normalize it. I mean, probably the biggest thing that would make sense to you is Forrester did a research with a number of our customers. And what they said is after implementing gray matter, the company saw a reduction of 90% of the noise that went to their teams. So if you think about that, right, there was 100 alerts that had to be investigated each month. Now there's 10 that they have to investigate. And it frees up so much time for them to go be offensive within their company. And that's really the value that we're trying to get to. We want to be more accurate in what you see and what you detect. We want to make you smarter in the way that you respond. And again, you will never do that by outsourcing those things.
Yeah, that's good, Colin, because you're absolutely correct. And I had never, in my experience, I'd never ever thought about completely replacing the entire security team with an outsourced one, because you're right. You have to have someone that understands the business and someone on the inside that knows what's going on in the network. To me, the ideal situation is a combination of a security team partnering with an outside third-party vendor that can help out with whatever you've got going on. And I think that covers a lot of ground. You mentioned, about the technology and using the technology to help you move forward in good security posture. And I think that's a key point that needs to be made as well. There's too many companies that I think to them technology bringing a technological solution in is an answer to a problem. And in reality, it's not. It should be looked at as a tool for the team to use to help them get a better posture on their security. All too often, we have these ideas that we just go out and buy the next greatest application or the next greatest tool, and that's going to solve most of our problems. In reality, that's not the way it works. What usually happens is you get a tool in, and it can be so complicated that the team either will not fully implement it or they won't take advantage of everything that's part of that application, and you're only using a portion of it. And in the long run, that really is not an efficient way to run your team or any of your security stuff.
I couldn't agree more. I think one of the biggest trends I'm seeing among enterprise chief information security officers today is what we call tool rationalization, which is looking at what has happened. I mean, it's like these security teams have been at war for the last 3 to 5 years in a way that's kind of unprecedented, right? I mean, just the number of attacks, the changing threat landscape, and most companies are increasing their budget 20 to 30% in cyber year over year. And I feel like 2022 has been a little bit of reckoning. 2020, we pushed all remote. We had to buy a whole bunch of new technology to enable this digital transformation that was being forced because of remote workforce. And this year is the year of going, how many of things do we own that actually do the same thing, right? And it's because it's all a Venn diagram. I mean, and there's so much overlap between these different technology suites. I was just talking to a customer the other day who took a new role, and they've got 4 different endpoint agents on most devices. I mean, each one does 80% of the other, right?
And that's not manageable. Yeah, and that's a problem because you can't manage that. And not only that, but it's costing the company money to keep those 4 things going. So something has to be done. And then tool rationalization is an excellent way to do that. That's an excellent point.
And I don't know what your opinion is on this, but one of the things that is as another kind of trend that I'm seeing right now around business leaders is that Microsoft has rolled out this new licensing model with their E5. And there's this conversation going on with the E5 license, these big companies where you get all the security suite basically for free. And then go ahead.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought there, but you're going to have to go back and explain what E5 is and what, I think you said ISIS, but I'm not sure.
So, Andrew, this is in our field right now. If Colin can explain the Microsoft licensing right now, he and I both could probably retire with a lot of money.
All right. So the Microsoft E5 is a cloud-based suite of productivity apps combined with advanced voice analytics, security, and compliance services. What it basically is Microsoft has created this licensing model where they will give you everything. And as part of everything, they're giving you security technologies at no cost. Very disruptive. When you think about some of the largest categories of security spend out there today, you have endpoint, the likes of CrowdStrike and SentinelOne, some of the most valuable cyber companies in the market out today. You have email security, Proofpoint, Mimecast, some of the most valuable security companies out there today. All of a sudden you have Microsoft, who I would say is getting competitive with the amount of investment they've put into it, giving away their tools as part of a broader IT spend. And Dave, I don't know what your take is on that, but this tool rationalization conversation is getting crazy because you're spending X amount, hundreds of thousands of dollars on your email security platform. And here comes a native built security platform for the email platform.
Yeah, well, I always have an opinion and I'm usually never one to hold back my opinion. This is something several years ago. I'd went on a rant on LinkedIn at one point about Microsoft licensing and what their categories were and what they had. And it's not just Microsoft, but it's other companies too that have applications specifically that could be in the security field. I never could understand why you'd want to sell me why any company would want to sell me a tool. And then, oh, by the way, to make it secure, you also have to buy this. And I thought that is just so wrong that if they're putting something out, it should be secure right off the bat. And if I do need something else, it needs to be part of the product. I get it. These people that are, the Microsoft licensing gurus that they have sitting in a room somewhere, they're figuring out their best return on investment. I get that. Companies have got to make their money. But to sit there and say, if I want their greatest email solution, it ought to be a secure email solution. Don't tell me I got to go buy yet another license and add on top of that just to make it secure. So I don't care if it's a financial thing. To me, Colin, if you want to sell it to me, don't tell me the cost of it until you tell me the cost of it that includes security. I know it sounds silly, but if I'm going to buy it, I want it as all parts. Everything's got to be included in it. You can't just keep adding on because that's a nickel and diming a company to death. I get it when you're trying to reduce your tool sets and trying to stick it to as less a tool sets you have, but I'm also not one to put all my eggs in one basket. I think I need other vendors and other security solutions to ensure that I've got everything covered. And throwing it all into one company, that to me is just not a good idea. Microsoft's got a lot of good products and they got a lot of good security products. But for me to buy their main products and buy their security products that's looking over their own stuff, I just have a little bit of heartburn with that. And that obviously that's my opinion, but I like spreading that out a little bit. So I'm not stuck with one vendor solution. And that's my opinion.
It's a great opinion. And I think there's a bunch more. And I think what's been interesting is to watch, the CFOs become more active in this conversation, because when they're looking at it, they're going unused, a couple $1 million in tool sets. Can we swap them? And that's the piece that has been interesting. And so, going back to the initial point, it's just there's just endless amount of new security technologies. There's a shortage of good people. There is a constant emergence of cutting edge threats, and security is a tough space. It's a tough space for security leaders. It's a tough space for security practitioners. My hope is that we can continue to use technology to alleviate those threats. And we've got a ton of people investing in the space. I think, what I feel bad about is how noisy it is. I mean, if you Google XDR right now, you will see endpoint providers. You will see providers that are providing a full suite of technology, similar to Microsoft would consider themselves kind of in that XDR bucket. You'll see MSSPs considering them that. I mean, to be a security buyer today is one of the more difficult things, I think, out there in business in general. I mean, the market is just exploding.
Yeah, it has gotten that way in the last few years. I think mainly because of all the the attention that cyber field is getting, everything that's going on. But again, I'm not one that you should be consolidating all into one company for this. And I know it makes it easier for the bean counters to deal with one instead of multiples. But from a security standpoint, I just don't see it as a very good idea, because that's just opening up a potential problem. But it's like a SolarWinds. If SolarWinds had a product that had you completely covered in every aspect of security, and all of a sudden this happened during a time where they had all of your security tools in one basket and they get compromised like they did, now you've got a really big problem. Not just one segment of your security program, but you got your entire security program potentially in trouble. And I think that could be what could happen with a Microsoft one day. Something could really bad happen to Microsoft, and if a company is throwing all their eggs in that basket, they got some problems coming on. You're going to see the lawsuits start flying and everything else is going to start occurring. So I guess that's my take on trying to spread it around a little bit. You can get great partners out there and you get input from a lot of different companies that is very valuable. There's just not one company that knows the answers to everything. And the more you get involved in security, the more information you're going to have, the more collaborative you are, the better your teams are going to be.
Well, and I'll throw something else in. I mean, it also seems to me like a conflict of interest, because if you're selling a product that you're making certain claims on, then you have to then say, well, we'll sell it to you, although we know there's some issues, but buy some other stuff here to actually fix these issues that we already know it has. So what you're talking about, I have not had a lot of time to digest, but just from what you're saying, it seems like that's a conflict of interest.
I'll trade you the soccer analogy for your point on, if you're going to build a product, it should be secure. I'm going to steal that. I hadn't thought about it that way, but if you're going to build an email security platform, why do I have to buy another technology to secure it?
Yep, that's exactly right. It's been my complaint for a long time. So okay,
we'll trade,
swap those,
and then
we'll swap those ideas. We're good. We're good to go. Just a couple of real quick questions before we start ending this episode. Here's a question for you. When companies are out there considering third-party partners in security, what would you want company leaders to consider or to know when they're in that mode of trying to decide who they need to go with, or even if they need to go with someone?
I think you got to, always listen to the team, especially if you have a security team. I think sometimes the mistake I see is people aren't listening to the folks that have to do the job every day. Doesn't mean you need to go buy every tool that your team wants. Teams technically want cool tools. So you gotta weed through that a little bit, but you gotta do that. Two, in the noise of the market, I highly encourage people to talk to customers and talk to peers. Don't ask the vendor for a reference. Ask your ISAC community. Hey, has anybody ever heard of this product? It's a great way to get some real world experience and get some references that you wouldn't be handed. What I'll say is it's like hiring somebody. Nobody ever gives out a bad reference. You ask me for a reference, I'll never give you somebody who had a bad experience with ReliaQuest. So that's another piece. The last is, I think, something, Dave, that you actually do well, like set expectations for the relationship. When you're going in and you're shopping and you're considering a new partnership, you've got to set expectations. It's no different than, again, hiring somebody, or it's no different than signing on a partner or getting into a marriage. Like, set expectations. Mm-hmm. Every company has its quirks, and you have expectations for what that product is supposed to deliver in your organization. Be clear up front, make sure it's captured. And then that way, as you go into the relationship, everybody's on the same page with how things should work.
Excellent. Now, one last quick question for you. Talking about cloud, because we brought that up. Give me one thing that a company should immediately do either before or right after their implementation into cloud.
The one thing, if a company's going to cloud, the one thing that I would want them to do is talk to their security team and be clear with what they're planning to do in the cloud, so that the security team can react appropriately. Too often do I hear, we've got a cloud project. I'm like, well, what are you going to do in Azure? What are you going to do in AWS? And they're like, we're not sure yet, but we're already there. We got to figure out what systems they're putting, what applications they're putting, who's accessing all those things. So if you're an IT leader, talk to your security counterparts about what you're putting, preferably prior. And they're not going to try and slow you down. They just want to know so they can make sure that they have the right tool set and the right teams to help you do that securely.
So basically what I'm hearing you saying, I think I can summarize this, is a company should have their requirements defined very well right up front before they even make that move to the cloud. Not just say, oh, we need to go to the cloud because everybody says it's a lot better to go to it.
I think that's spot on. And what I often find is it starts with somebody somewhere in the company who has a great idea, a great use case for the cloud, something that, needs spikes in resources and then can sit dormant or whatever it is, right? It's way more cost effective to put there. And all of a sudden it kind of ripples through the company. We're going cloud and making sure they have to find requirements consolidated and everybody understands this is what that means. But two, just talk to the security team. And if you're a security professional, don't hide from asking the teams. Great, we're going to the cloud, super excited. It's going to be great. Your team is going to be excited. I mean, there is nothing more exciting right now than a security professional getting to help secure cloud. The security analysts are all over it. It's the next frontier that they want to learn. So it's not a bad thing, and don't make it a bad thing, but work across the business to go try and figure out what are they doing, what are they putting, and then again, starting to assess, your control sets and make sure that you're going to be able to help do that in a secure manner.
Very good. Well, we've been talking with Colin O'Conner, the Chief Operating Officer with ReliaQuest, and we really appreciated this conversation. Colin, thanks again for joining us, and hopefully we may even be able to do it again in the future.
Hey, that would be great if you guys would have me back. So, Andrew, Dave, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Colin. Great talking with you.
Good. And right after this, we'll come back with our 3 points. And we're back for our 3-point session. This is where we take a conversation that we just had with our guest and we extract 3 main points that we would like you as the user to take from this. And we've been talking with Colin O'Conner from ReliaQuest. It's headquartered here in Tampa. We've really enjoyed our conversation with him. So, Andrew, if you'd like to get started here, let's pull out these 3 points.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking with Colin. And I think the first point that I would bring up is that you can't completely outsource cyber.
That's very good. I would have to agree with that point. It's really impossible to completely outsource your cyber program for a lot of reasons. Some of the reasons that I would think of in which I would never have tried to outsource my entire program would be that the culture of your company plays a huge impact on how you do your security inside the company. And having outsiders to kind of take that over is really a daunting task. And I'm not sure one that any managed security service provider could actually live up to. So that's our first point. It best works with a combination of a cyber team and a managed service provider if you're going to be doing any outsourcing at all. That way you have someone on the inside that understands the culture and the knowledge of the business along with working with a managed security service provider. Number 2.
Okay. Number 2, investing in people and technology has got to be one of the key things that you have to do.
Exactly. The way things change so much in this field right now, technology changes rapidly, security is changing rapidly, the threat landscape changes rapidly, and some of the best and well-protected companies are those that are investing in their people and their technology. On to number 3.
And number 3, I would say choosing your cyber tools wisely has got to be the last one.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the most challenging one because there are literally hundreds of options out there when it comes to cyber tools. So when you're choosing these cyber tools and controls that you're putting in, you need to be very careful at choosing them and you need to be very thoughtful at choosing them. This also includes, and I've seen this a lot, going through your existing tool set that you currently have operating in your environment and doing a rationalization on them. And what that means basically is you're evaluating them for the effectiveness for your environment. You're evaluating them on whether or not they're being efficient or they're doing what you thought they were supposed to be doing in the first place. All too often, I've seen tools be brought in, applications be brought in. There was the vendor sold it on an idea, and you really thought that was a good idea. And then when they actually got it into operations, it didn't do what you thought it was going to do. So does it still fit into your environment? This also helps you go through and decide if you have overlap in tools, which may, in the long run, help decrease a budget or at least reduce the budget in some areas that you may be able to spend in others. That means if you have a couple of applications that are kind of doing the same thing, why do you have them both in place? You're going to make up your mind on which one you really need to use. And then lastly, on that same thought, is when you perform a rationalization, you're also determining whether or not that is actually needed in your environment anymore. One of the things that I learned really early as a CISO was that there were a lot of decisions that I'd seen made in the past, and this includes policies or decisions on buying product that were made in the past that were really good for that time and the decision that was made for that time. But, skip ahead a couple of years, and now the same decision probably would not be made again because there's something else or better that may be put into place. So what was good decision in the past may not be the same and right decision at this moment. So that's something to think about, and that's where rationalization comes in. There was one other area, Andrew, in these 3 points that I really wanted to kind of bring out just as not really a point, but something that I wanted to bring up. And that comes back to your tooling again. Colin brought it up, and we mentioned that we shouldn't be throwing all of our security tools into one vendor basket. That was definitely brought up, and I think it's worth mentioning. You don't want to have your entire suite of security being thrown into one vendor. Obviously, and for a lot of us, we understand why that would be, but why you would not want to do that would be in case there is something that goes wrong with that one vendor. Your entire security program may be at jeopardy. And there may be problems that will pop up by one little problem with one vendor if you're using one vendor for everything you do.
Yeah, well, I'd say that that's something, say, CEOs wouldn't normally think about. So that's definitely a great thing to bring up.
Yeah, you usually run into more of that with the CFO, the one that's paying the check. They like to have as less vendors as possible. It's easier to take care of the invoicing and probably get a bigger reduction in cost of something if you're going with everything with one vendor. But it's really not a good idea to do that in security. You can do some leveraging. There's other ways to do leveraging of getting better pricing, but just throwing your eggs into one basket is just not a good thing in the cyber world. So that's kind of what we've done here with today's conversation with Colin, and we sure appreciate Colin's effort and his time that he spent with us. We're looking forward to having him back again in a future episode. Any last thoughts, Andrew?
Just another great education in cybersecurity, and looking forward to the next one.
Thank you for listening to 3 Point Cyber, a production from Alpha Omega Advisors. If you have questions about this episode or have a topic for discussion or guest you would like us to have on, please email us at 3pointcyber@gmail.com. That's 3, the number 3, point, P-O-I-N-T, cyber, C-Y-B-E-R, all one word, 3pointcyber@gmail.com. We encourage you to share this podcast with others. This podcast is owned and produced by Alpha Omega Advisors. The theme song was created by music producer Andrew Van Wert in Nashville, Tennessee. This is Dave Summit, and until next time, keep on learning.